It says it's excellent, so I'll assume that I'm streaming. Thank you, everybody who's tuning in. If this doesn't work, then I'll just simply rebroadcast tomorrow night. So we'll see. For those of you tuning in, I am currently, and who haven't watched me before, I am reading my dad's manuscripts. They're cold reads, so I've never seen any of the manuscripts before, and it's all brand new. So, yeah, there's that. They're all fantasy novels, and this one is actually a sequel to a previous novel that I already read, Talisman of the Winds. You can go back into my past broadcasts to watch me stumble through that one. That was my first one. There was also The Sword and the Rose, and that is the second one, which is unrelated. It's a separate novel altogether. And so now I'm reading the third novel and wrapping it up, possibly tonight, if I can get the stream to work. I'm not sure. If there's no picture, let me know, because I should have picture, but it's not showing me picture on my playback, so I can only hope that it is. Anyway, so tonight I will be working on chapter 15 of the Stonecaller. Chapter 15. At last the king halted his retreat to fight them. Though several lords had deserted the king, joining the lady's cause, there were many others who had tied their positions too closely and too long to the king's, who could expect to fall with him. That fall would be a long one, for men and families used to having the king's ear, the king's favor. So the army that the king was able to gather was altogether very near in size to the one that had served him at Higfrid. It's likely, Gwathmaren said, looking at Quedrim, that he's heard about the state of Quedrim's health and wants to fight this battle before Quedrim recovers. I've been doing what I can to rebuild my powers. There's a fine line between practicing to a limit and wearing myself out so that I never get better. I'm afraid all I can promise for tomorrow's battle is a small demonstration. Gwathmaren scowled, not in anger at Quedrim, but in annoyance at the entire situation. We can hope the king's men have heard all the extended horrors of your power, at least sufficient to make them nervous when they see some stones floating around. Quedrim would have apologized for his inability, but he knew no one blamed him for anything, nor did it help that no one blamed him. The next day, their army fell into formation, ready for battle. Quedrim, with an ox cart full of stones, stood behind one section of the line. I hope they've been told I'm not likely to be winning their battle for them, he thought. The next thought that came was of the difficulty of trying to tell the army that without telling them they were in real trouble now. They had won several fights with the help of Quedrim and his stones. How could they win without him? Well, no help for it any longer. The armies were advancing. He picked out some stones, about the limit of what he could handle at one time in his condition, and sent them out in a line in front of the Gifradi. It was not at all like his wall, but it would have some effect. He kept them just in front of the Gifradi line until the two forces were closing. At that moment, he sent the stones hurling into the enemy line. No, it was not like the wall, but it caused severe disruption in the line for its whole 50-foot length. However, he could not push them on very far, and suddenly had to let them go, slumping in the ox cart, puffing and wheezing like an old man. He pulled himself back up to look at what was happening. The royal forces were bending at the point where he'd sent in the stones, and it was likely, if the Gifradi maintained the pressure, that they would break through. Up behind the infantry, a force of cavalry were coming. He wondered where they'd come from. Of course, on horses they'd be able to make a quick shift from one part of the field to another. He wondered for a second if this had been some kind of stratagem designed to deal with whatever effect he might have on the infantry. That wasn't going to help the main problem, which was that they might just negate what effect he'd had. He couldn't have enough stones to stop them, even to slow them. There was a fellow leading those cavalry, a fellow in fancy armor. Maybe. He dropped a special stone into his sling, whirled it, and let go, steering the stone directly at that leader. Then his vision began to close in. He put a hand on the side of the ox cart to support himself. Then suddenly he dropped into blackness. He came up out of darkness into a room, dimly lit by oil lamps. There was no one in the room, not even other wounded people. He wondered how the battle had gone. It was likely they'd won, though it wasn't impossible that the king had given orders to take him alive. He was considering the possibility of calling out. Then it was day, and grey light filtered in from outside. He realized he must have dropped back to sleep. He opened his mouth to call out, but all he managed was a whispery croak. It surely wasn't enough to be heard anywhere. But suddenly there was an old healer in the room. "Ah, you're awake. Good news. Don't try to speak just yet. Let me give you something to drink first." The healer gently raised Quadroon's head and allowed him to take a few careful sips of water. From its taste, the water contained some herbs, but he drank it down thirstily. He wasn't about to stir up the healer's ire by asking if they'd won this time, though it was a different healer. He might have possibly moderated the news. Still, he didn't need that kind of aggravation. Someone would have gotten word by now that he was awake, and then he'd find out just what was happening. Sure enough, shortly after the healer left him, Gwathnarin came in. "We won, then?" "We won. Bloody awful battle, but we won. The king's dead, killed by a sling stone that smashed in his helmet. We know it was a sling stone because there are stone fragments still embedded in the wound. The way I understand it, he was moving with some horsemen to support his right flank when he went down. Some fools are even talking about a lightning bolt from a clear sky. When they saw him go down, most lost heart and pulled out, headed for their homes or whatever. A few charged home, but not quite enough to change the situation. But that was just a cavalry force. We had hard fighting on our right flank, until their right started to go. A hard fight. Sorry I wasn't able to do more on my wing. You did what you could. Killing the king, that was a feat in itself, not to mention that you near killed yourself doing it." "Near killed myself? Put my lights out for a bit, that's all." "Put your lights out for 4 days. The healers weren't sure you'd ever wake." 4 days? It wasn't like Gwathnarin to joke about things like that. Still. 4 days. We brought you into Guatutos. Installed you in the palace with people to watch you for any sign you were waking. There were a couple of false starts when someone misread a muscle twitch, but still, here we are. The lady survived, of course. He was quite sure that Gwathnarin would have told him first if that were not the case, but just to make certain. She did. Left word she was to be informed the day or night when you woke. When was her word too, not, no doubt, no matter how doubtful the healers were, she knew you'd wake. "I hope they didn't disturb her rest just for me," Quadroon muttered. Gwathnarin looked at him, unsmiling. "She's got even less time to herself now she's a royal lady of Davlash. She's at present listening to a pair of canny fellows telling her how wonderful she is and how ardently they support her. Since they do both command powerful influence, she can't tell them to go to chaos away. But, believe me, she'll be here as soon as she can courteously disentangle herself." "Oh." Gwathnarin gave him a stern look. "Listen, I thought I knew you well. Once, when I looked in your past, found that you seemed to be out for anything you could get, no matter how you got it. I didn't trust you. Didn't trust you for a long time. Even when you seem to have thrown in your lot with us, despite our raggle-taggle bunch of starvelings in the hills. I'm not still sure how much I like you, Quadrim, but the lady likes you. Likes you a lot. I've been around enough to know that people can change, but I've also been around long enough to know how some people can pretend to change to get something they want badly enough. I'm not sure how to judge you. You've served us well, but you've got that past of yours. The lady likes you, so I'll try to like you too. But I've been an uncle to that girl since she was a small one in her father's house, and I won't see her unhappy. He stood and left them before Quedrim could respond. Quedrim spent some futile minutes preparing responses to the Gwathnarin, trimming and turning and polishing his phrases. Did the grim old soldier suspect Quedrim of some underhanded purpose? Was he threatening Quedrim with something if he made the lady unhappy? Just how was he supposed to make the lady unhappy? Or happy, either, if it came to that. Of course, Gwathnarin was not there for him to use these words on. And when he did return, some while later, Anna Vristi was with him. Her presence kept Quedrim from using any of those words he thought were so clever. I told him you'd wake. Then I came as soon as I could. How are you feeling? Better. He saw Gwathnarin's face over her shoulder, glowering at him, as if trying to tell him something without words. Good, Anna Vristi said. Do you feel well enough for me to talk to you for a bit? Certainly. She turned to Gwathnarin. Would you leave us alone for a little, Gwathnarin? I know you don't trust anyone when I'm around, but I'm sure you can admit that Quedrim has demonstrated amply that he means me no harm. Quedrim expected Gwathnarin to make a token protest or at least give him some parting glower, but the old warrior's face held no expression as he left and turned and left the room. Lady, Quedrim began, but she stopped him. At least when we're alone, Quedrim, I prefer you to call me Anarchy. Anarchy, he forced a smile. Well, I'm afraid most nicknames people have called me from time to time are not the sort I'd like to repeat. Oh, I imagine we'll come up with something. In a while. Quedrim will do for now. I'm glad you survived. So am I, he muttered. The alternative does not appeal to me. We'll have to see to it that you're properly rewarded. That small plot we've given you is not nearly enough for what you've done. Anarchy, I didn't do this for any reward, and any reward you give me is going to upset someone else. Solbad Answer wasn't the only one who dislikes me. Oh, I know that entirely too well. There are so many who think me just a girl who can be swayed by clever words, and when they find out otherwise, they get upset. I have to maintain a service of people who gather information for me, who this lord or that lord is talking to, what they do and say. So I seldom make promises, save to consider their words before I make my decision. And I've managed to arrange a situation where most of the lords respect me. Beneath it all, of course, 2/3 of them think they could do my job and do it better. I take a risk if I declare someone my heir, because if that person doesn't get the notion on his own, several of his friends will try to convince him to replace me without waiting for my death. If I take a consort, there is the same problem. I have to have a man who has some ambitions, but not a man who has so much ambition that he decides to replace me. So, now I'm a royal lady of Deblash, and the situation remains the same, though the stadium is larger. And still, I dance my dance of keeping them happy enough that they don't rebel, but not letting anyone come close to me. It's not a cheerful prospect for a life, Quedrim. It's not a cheerful prospect for a life, Quedrim. I need someone to be able to share things with. Someone who won't be looking to rule in my place. Then Quedrim realized where this was leading. Realized, in fact, why it had taken Anna Vristi so long to come to the point. You don't want me, Anarchy. You'll set all the lords to hating you, that's for sure. This is just the right time to do it. After so many years of war, everyone's ready for peace, and they won't be willing to start anything as active as a rebellion just yet. And I have that much more time to cement alliances with some of them, At least enough so the alliance against me won't be so large. I'm just a wandering gambler, Anarchy. You think I don't know all about your past? Remember the people who give me the reports? If that disturbs you, I'm sorry, but I've already told you how I can't afford to take anyone on the first appearances. But I also know you've done a lot for us. That you've stayed with me in the wooded Bodaba, when there was no certainty that I would regain my Karmelstadt, let alone come so far as I have. So I ask you agree to be my consort. You're one of a very small few who I could choose without fear that you'd try to unseat me. She held up a hand to forestall his response. Don't answer just yet. Think on it for a while. Answer me when you're back on your feet again. He thought this conversation would keep him awake, but he'd found himself coming awake again, lying on his side, and realized he'd slept for a while. The next thing he realized was that he was not alone, and he turned over. Laboriously, his wound was troubling him again, to see Shapakalish looking at him. I suppose I needn't be surprised that you could find your way in here. Ah, the hero's out of humor today, and in such circumstances, too. You! Did you steer the lady toward me somehow? Not at all, oh greatly suspicious hero, not at all. I've brought you here, and what happened has happened, without my having to resort to love potions or any such stuff. You keep jumping in and out of my life. I can hardly believe that's all happenstance. The little man's face took on such an exaggerated appearance of shame that Quedrim didn't bother trying to convince himself of his authenticity. The most perspicacious hero. I must sorrowfully admit that not all of it has been happenstance. Indeed, the very first meeting, I took my place in that spot, knowing that I would meet you, and knowing that if you were approached properly, you would be the man for the job that had to be done. You see, the Lady of Praises, for whom I have the honor to carry out various commissions from time to time, has become most grievously aware of the bent of the magic of the late Batlas. It was therefore entrusted to me to see to it that he was done away with. I chose you to carry out the mission. I brought you to Higfrud, confident that matters would work themselves out as they did. And so it happened. No, there is no saying that I might not have put some sort of nudge now and again, if such had been needed, but none was needed. And now here you are, about to marry your princess. You steered me into that as well? No, 1,000 times no. You moved yourself quite well, and without any assistance from me. And if the old tales frighten you, and you fear that I will come for when your first child is born, and demand him or her as payment, rest easy. That is not my sort of bargain. When you dealt with Batlas, you did all I needed of you. I only came to explain to you how and why I come into your life. So, are you telling me that if I wed Anarchy, I will live happily ever after? Ah, yes, the third part of the payment. Ever after is a long time, and happiness is something that cannot really be known without occasional unhappiness to compare it with. I can tell you, though, that you and Lady Anavristi will most likely live as happily as two people can in the circumstances. In the circumstances? You're leaving yourself a room for an excuse if everything goes chaos away. Unfortunately, oh dissatisfied young hero, I cannot tell the future. If I could, I would not. All I can say is that one ought to seize the day, make the most of what one has. Indeed. And had you best not leave before the guards hear us and look in? Oh, young hero of such little faith, before the guards hear us, and do you think I would come in here without having made sure that nothing that was said in here would be overheard? Farewell, hero, until we meet again. And he was gone. The wedding of Anavristi, royal lady of Davlash, to Lord Quedrim of Arndal, was a fine spectacle. The lady had declared that, given the demands of recent years of strife, no outrageous sums would be spent on it. Even that permitted sufficient ostentation to satisfy the people that this was a true royal wedding. A great platform was built on which the royal couple with sundry attendants were seated, and a crowd of common people milled about below, shouting good wishes to them. In order to allow as many people as possible to take part, the citizens were urged to keep moving, which most of them took well. Around the platform's base, a double rank of light infantry were stationed to watch the crowd. Thaldo, now a 50 commander, muttered out of the side of his mouth to 50 commander next to him, "I knew him when he first came to Higfred. He was a bit rough, but even then I knew he was going places." Up on the stage, Wagner smiled grimly at everyone. Everyone knew he wasn't entirely happy about the lady's choice of consort, the more snide suggesting he wanted to fill that role himself. Somewhere closer to Quedrum stood Malsanto and Genelabus, finely dressed and wearing smiles. And off in the crowd, seemingly immune to the urging of the soldiers to keep moving, was a little broad-faced man in leather cap, leading a mule. Okay. And that is the end of tonight's stream. I still don't know if there was any video, so I'm hoping there was a picture. I can't tell until I load the stream. So if you sat here for the past 20 some odd minutes and you didn't see a picture, then I will be redoing this broadcast tomorrow with a picture, come heck or high water. Hopefully at least you had audio, but I'll know when I pull the stream and pull the broadcast. So either way, I will talk to you again tomorrow, and have a good night.